The Arctic wind cut like knives across Alaska's frozen coast when Commander Alexandra Lex Morgan stepped off the helicopter. She wasn't here to fight an enemy submarine. She was here to fight something colder, prejudice. Before the exercise even began, Admiral Richard Brooks made his disdain clear. "Gentlemen and lady," he sneered, warning that weakness in Arctic waters was a death sentence. The other commanders laughed. One muttered that she should stick to warmer seas. Another said she was bound to fail. But no one, not Brooks, not her rivals, knew what the Pentagon had locked away in her classified file. Lex wasn't just another submarine commander, she was one of the Navy's most advanced Arctic rescue specialists. And when a training exercise spiraled into real catastrophe, ice collapsing, currents raging, commanders drowning, Lex would be forced to prove, once again, that survival doesn't depend on gender. It depends on courage, skill, and the refusal to let anyone die on your watch. What began as humiliation in an Arctic training pool would soon become a fight for survival that exposed every weakness in the system and revealed why Lex Morgan's name was already legend in classified Pentagon files. That night, nobody knew that Commander Alexandra Lex Morgan's single decision would not only save lives, but prove that the toughest battles aren't fought underwater. They're fought against the prejudice above the surface. The bitter Alaskan wind howled across the Navy Arctic Submarine Operations Center as Commander Lex Morgan stepped off the transport helicopter. Her auburn hair, pulled back in regulation military precision, caught the harsh Arctic light. At 37, she had commanded nuclear submarines through the most dangerous waters on Earth, but today, she faced something different entirely. "Welcome to hell, commanders," barked Admiral Richard Brooks, a barrel-chested man whose weathered face showed decades of submarine service. His cold gray eyes swept over the 12 submarine commanders assembled before him, lingering dismissively on Lex. "For the next 72 hours, you'll learn what real Arctic submarine warfare means when the ice wants to crush your boat before the enemy gets the chance." But Admiral Brooks didn't know about the classified file sitting in Pentagon archives, a file that would change everything. The other 11 commanders were all men, their ages ranging from 35 to 52. Commander Jake Harrison, a cocky 38-year-old from the USS Phoenix, smirked as he looked at Lex. "Guess they're really scraping the bottom of the barrel now," he muttered to Commander Paul Garrett beside him. Lex kept her emerald eyes focused ahead, her military bearing unchanged. She had faced worse than schoolyard taunts. "This isn't your typical submarine exercise," Admiral Brooks continued, his voice cutting through the Arctic air like ice. "Under Arctic ice pack, your sonar is compromised, your communications are limited, and your margin for error is zero. One mistake down there, and your entire crew isn't just dead, they're entombed under a frozen ocean." The training facility sprawled across the frozen landscape, a massive complex of buildings, indoor submarine simulators, and most importantly, the Arctic Operations Pool. This wasn't an ordinary training pool. It was a 200-meter-long, 50-meter-deep facility designed to simulate submarine operations under Arctic ice conditions, complete with a movable ice ceiling that could replicate real polar conditions. Wait until you see what happens when the emergency protocols fail. Admiral Brooks led them to the main simulator briefing room, where detailed Arctic submarine warfare protocols were displayed on massive screens. "Gentlemen," he said, his emphasis on the word deliberate, and "lady," he added with barely concealed disdain. "Arctic submarine operations require split-second decision-making, ice navigation expertise, and absolute command presence. Some of you," his eyes fixed on Lex, "might find these demands overwhelming." Commander Harrison chuckled. "Admiral, with respect, shouldn't there be different standards for different physical capabilities? Ice navigation requires upper body strength That's exactly what I'm talking about," Brooks replied, his voice gaining edge. "In the Arctic, weakness isn't just a liability, it's a death sentence for 140 crew members." Lex felt the familiar burn of discrimination, but her voice remained steady. "Admiral Brooks, my record with the USS Leviathan includes 3 Arctic deployments. My crew's ice navigation success rate is—" "Your crew's survival," Brooks interrupted, "had nothing to do with your gender-based limitations, Morgan. It was despite them." The room fell silent except for the wind outside. "Down here, we deal in reality, not political correctness. You won't believe what she's about to prove." The first day of training pushed every commander to their limits in the Arctic Operations Pool. They practiced emergency surface procedures through artificial ice, equipment failures under frozen conditions, and navigation protocols using the facility's sophisticated ice simulation system. Admiral Brooks made a point of pairing Lex with the most demanding exercises, always with commentary. "Morgan, your ice penetration technique is 12 seconds slower than regulation," he announced as she surfaced her training submarine from a simulated under-ice navigation drill. In real Arctic conditions, that's the difference between surfacing and being crushed by shifting ice. Commander Garrett nodded approvingly. "Maybe she should stick to warmer waters, Admiral." But Lex's instructor from Deep Submergence Unit Training had taught her something these men didn't know. Patience under pressure creates precision under crisis. That evening in the officers' quarters, the male commanders gathered around Harrison's bunk, their voices carrying despite their attempts at whispers. "She's going to get someone killed," Harrison said. "You can't have weak links in Arctic submarine operations." "Brooks knows what he's doing," replied Commander Dennis Walsh from the USS Shark. "He's trying to wash her out before she becomes a real problem in ice waters." Unknown to them, Lex heard every word from her isolated corner room. She had been through this before, but something felt different this time. More systematic, more coordinated. The next morning brought the real test. "Today we simulate catastrophic ice breach scenario," Admiral Brooks announced at 0600 hours. "Your submarine has emergency surface through Arctic ice, and you need to evacuate crew through unstable ice conditions while maintaining submarine security protocols. This exercise has a 90% success rate when performed by qualified commanders." He paused, looking directly at Lex, "and a 100% fatality rate when performed by unqualified personnel." The exercise took place in the main Arctic Operations Pool, where a sophisticated system could simulate real Arctic conditions, shifting ice plates, sub-zero water temperature, and unpredictable currents. 6 commanders would work in teams of 2, with one team serving as observers and emergency backup. "Morgan," Brooks commanded, "you're with Harrison." "Consider it a learning opportunity from a real Arctic submarine commander." Harrison's face darkened. "Admiral, I request a different partner. My crew's safety record shouldn't depend on—" "Your orders are clear, Commander," Brooks cut him off. "Unless you're questioning Navy command structure." But Admiral Brooks had just made a decision that would expose his own dangerous assumptions. The exercise began at 1000 hours. Teams 1 and 2 successfully completed their simulated emergency surface procedures, navigating the artificial ice conditions and evacuation protocols. Team 3 encountered minor equipment issues but managed their objectives effectively. Then it was Lex and Harrison's turn. "Remember, Morgan," Harrison said as they entered the training submarine simulator, "just follow my lead and try not to compromise the mission." The simulated submarine surfaced in the Arctic Operations Pool, breaking through artificial ice designed to replicate real polar conditions. The water was brutally cold, maintained at 32 degrees Fahrenheit, and the artificial ice above them groaned and shifted, creating an atmosphere of genuine danger. Harrison took command immediately, aggressively pushing through the ice breach protocol. Lex followed, her movements smooth and controlled, conserving energy while maintaining proper submarine emergency procedures. "First objective complete," Harrison reported through his communicator. Moving to crew evacuation simulation, that's when everything went catastrophically wrong. The Arctic Operations Pool's ice simulation system suffered a catastrophic malfunction. Instead of the controlled environment they expected, massive chunks of artificial ice, each weighing over 2,000 pounds, began breaking away from the sealing mechanism, creating real danger. The water temperature system failed, dropping another 15 degrees instantly, and the current generators activated at maximum power without safety controls. "Emergency! Emergency!" The control room's voice crackled through their communicators. "All personnel aboard exercise immediately. Critical system failure in progress." But Harrison, desperate to prove his superiority over Lex, ignored the abort command. "We're completing the exercise," he announced. "Morgan, maintain formation and don't slow us down." Above them, Admiral Brooks watched in growing alarm as his carefully controlled submarine training environment spiraled into genuine crisis. 6 other commander teams were still in various stages of the exercise, and the malfunctioning systems were affecting all of them. Brooks, shut it down, the chief safety officer shouted. Those ice chunks are heavy enough to crush a real submarine. Someone's going to die. I'm trying, Brooks replied, frantically working controls that no longer responded. The system's not responding to emergency shutdown commands. In the water, Lex immediately saw what Harrison couldn't or wouldn't see. This wasn't just equipment failure, it was catastrophic system breakdown that threatened every commander in the pool. Her submarine training told her the situation was beyond normal emergency protocols. Harrison, we need to help the other teams, Lex said through her communicator. Negative, Harrison replied. We complete our mission first. That's how real submarine commanders operate. But Lex had made her decision. She broke formation and swam toward Team 2's area, where Commanders Peterson and Kelly were trapped under a massive ice chunk that had become wedged against their simulated submarine conning tower. They were running out of air in their emergency breathing apparatus, their reserves nearly depleted. Morgan, what are you doing? Harrison's voice crackled with anger. Lex didn't answer. She reached Peterson first, sharing her emergency air supply while using techniques from her classified deep submergence unit training to assess the structural situation. The ice chunk was too heavy to move directly, but its position against the submarine simulator created leverage opportunities that most commanders wouldn't recognize. Above the surface, Admiral Brooks watched in stunned silence as Lex began a complex rescue procedure he had never seen before in 30 years of submarine operations. Where did she learn that ice navigation technique? He asked the safety officer. I don't know, sir, but it's working. She's treating that ice like a submarine hull breach. Using her diving knife and emergency tools, Lex created pressure relief points in the ice structure, applying submarine damage control principles to ice rescue. Then, positioning herself at the optimal angle, she used the water's buoyancy and precise leverage to shift the massive chunk just enough for Peterson and Kelly to escape to the surface. Jesus, Morgan, Peterson gasped as they reached the pool deck together. You saved our lives. That was submarine-level damage control, but the crisis was far from over. Team 3 was in even more danger. The current system malfunction had created a vortex effect that was pulling Commander Stevens and Baker toward the pool's powerful circulation intake. If they got caught in that suction, it would be like being pulled into a submarine's ballast system. Fatal. Harrison finally reached the surface, having completed his solo exercise. Brooks, I completed the mission. Where's my evaluation? Admiral Brooks ignored him, his attention focused on the water where Lex was now swimming against impossible currents to reach the endangered commanders. She'll never make it, Harrison said dismissively. The current's too strong. Basic physics. That's when Lex demonstrated why the Pentagon had classified certain parts of her submarine training record. Instead of fighting the current directly, Lex used advanced underwater navigation techniques taught only to elite submarine rescue specialists. She positioned herself to ride the artificial current in a controlled pattern, using the same principles submarine commanders use to navigate underwater currents in emergency situations. She reached Stevens first, who was unconscious from exhaustion and the extreme cold. Using emergency revival techniques developed for submarine rescue operations, she restored his breathing while simultaneously calculating the approach vector for Baker. Control room, I need emergency surface assistance, Lex commanded, her voice calm despite the chaos around her. Negative, Morgan, came the reply. Surface assistance systems are offline. You're operating on emergency protocols only. Baker was weakening fast, his struggles against the vortex becoming desperate. Lex made a split-second decision that violated every safety protocol in submarine training manuals. She disconnected her own safety line to achieve maximum maneuverability. Morgan, what are you doing? Admiral Brooks shouted from the control room. What submarine commanders do in real emergencies, Lex replied. Free from surface constraints, Lex swam with Stevens toward Baker, using her own body as a buffer against the deadly current. The three of them formed a human rescue chain, with Lex serving as the anchor point against the suction, the same technique used in submarine compartment flooding emergencies. But now, all three of them were trapped by the malfunctioning system. The situation in the control room had become desperate. Admiral Brooks worked frantically to restore system control while his technical team prepared emergency response protocols that had never been tested in real crisis situations. Sir, we're looking at potential multiple fatalities, the chief safety officer reported. The circulation system won't shut down, and manual rescue isn't possible in these current conditions. Brooks felt the weight of command failure crushing down on him. His prejudice against Lex had blinded him to the real danger his training systems posed to all the commanders. "There has to be something," he muttered, then louder. "What about submarine emergency protocols? Military emergency overrides?" "Already tried, sir." The system was designed to prevent manual overrides during training exercises. It's a safety feature that's become a death trap. In the water, Lex felt her strength beginning to fade. Holding two unconscious submarine commanders against an artificial current designed to simulate the worst underwater conditions was beyond normal human capability. That's when she remembered her father's words from Naval Academy submarine training. Sometimes the only way out is through the impossible depth. You're not going to believe what she does next. Lex positioned Stevens and Baker in a formation that maximized their buoyancy while minimizing current resistance, the same configuration used in submarine crew evacuation procedures. Then, using a technique that existed only in classified submarine rescue manuals, she created a human torpedo formation. Instead of fighting the vortex, she aimed all three of them directly into it, using their combined mass and her controlled positioning to punch through the artificial current into the calm water zone beyond, exactly like a submarine penetrating a thermocline layer. It was a maneuver that required split-second timing, perfect buoyancy control, and the kind of three-dimensional thinking that only submarine commanders develop through years of underwater operations. One miscalculation would send all three of them into the circulation system's mechanical components. Admiral Brooks watched from the control room as Lex and the two unconscious commanders disappeared into the violent vortex, apparently swept toward certain death. "No," he whispered. "No, no, no." For 40 seconds, the churning water showed no sign of them. The other commanders who had successfully completed their exercises stood on the pool deck in stunned silence, assuming they had just witnessed a triple fatality. Harrison shook his head grimly. "I told you she wasn't qualified for real submarine emergency conditions." Then Stevens' head broke the surface in the calm zone beyond the vortex, followed by Baker, both coughing but breathing. And finally, Lex emerged, exhausted but alive, supporting both men toward the pool ladder with the steady determination of a submarine commander who never leaves crew members behind. "Medic," she called out. "Both men need immediate attention for hypothermia and oxygen depletion." The pool deck erupted in activity as medical personnel rushed to assist. Admiral Brooks stood frozen, staring at the woman he had dismissed and humiliated, a woman who had just demonstrated submarine emergency leadership beyond anything he had seen in 3 decades of naval service. "How?" he asked quietly as medics worked on Stevens and Baker. "How did you know that technique would work?" Lex, wrapped in emergency blankets while medical staff checked her vital signs, looked up at him with those steady emerald eyes that had guided the USS Leviathan through 3 Arctic deployments. "Submarine training, Admiral. Real submarine training." But the biggest revelation was still coming. As the medical teams worked on Stevens and Baker, both expected to make full recoveries, Admiral Brooks pulled Lex aside for a private conversation that would change his entire perspective on submarine command. "Commander Morgan, I owe you more than an apology," he began, his earlier arrogance completely gone. "My behavior during this exercise was unacceptable, and my assumptions about your submarine capabilities nearly cost lives." Lex remained silent, letting him continue. "I received classified orders to evaluate your suitability for advanced Arctic submarine operations," Brooks admitted. There were questions at Pentagon levels about whether female commanders could handle extreme underwater conditions in polar deployments. And now, Lex asked. Brooks looked back at the Arctic operations pool, where emergency crews were still working to restore normal operations, a pool that had nearly claimed 3 submarine commanders' lives. "Now I have questions about my own suitability for training submarine commanders." That evening, as Brooks prepared his after-action report, his aide brought him a file marked Classified Submarine Command Eyes Only. "Sir, this came from Pentagon's Submarine Operations Division. They said you should have received it before the Arctic exercise began." Brooks opened the file and felt his blood run cold. Inside was Commander Alexandra Morgan's complete submarine training record, including classified sections that revealed capabilities he had never imagined. Deep Submergence Rescue Unit, top 2% of all submarine officers, Arctic Submarine Operations Specialist, Classified Northern Fleet Training, Advanced Underwater Emergency Response, program developer and chief instructor, Pentagon Arctic submarine consultant, classified polar operations advisor, submarine rescue techniques innovator, 3 life-saving protocols developed. The final document was a personal commendation from the Chief of Naval Operations himself, specifically noting Lex's development of new submarine Arctic rescue protocols that had already saved lives in classified polar operations. Admiral Brooks set the file down and realized the devastating scope of his error. He hadn't been testing an unqualified officer. He had been testing one of the Navy's most elite submarine Arctic specialists, someone whose innovations were already being used fleet-wide. But Lex Morgan's response to his apology would surprise everyone. The next morning, Admiral Brooks called all commanders to a final briefing. His demeanor was completely different, professional, respectful, and clearly humbled by what he had witnessed. Commanders, yesterday's exercise revealed critical flaws in our training systems, and, more importantly, in my command judgment, he began. Commander Morgan's actions saved multiple lives and demonstrated the highest standards of submarine leadership under impossible conditions. He turned directly to Lex. Commander, would you be willing to share your submarine rescue techniques with the group? Your methods should become standard Arctic submarine training protocol throughout the fleet. Lex stood and faced her fellow submarine commanders, including Harrison, who couldn't meet her eyes. The techniques I used yesterday aren't mysterious, she said quietly. They require submarine damage control training, underwater emergency response preparation, and, most importantly, the willingness to put crew lives ahead of personal safety. The same principles we swear to uphold on every submarine deployment. She paused, looking around the room at 11 of the Navy's submarine commanders. But they also require something else, the ability to see past assumptions about what submarine commanders can accomplish, regardless of who they are. Commander Peterson, one of the men she had rescued, raised his hand. Commander Morgan, where did you develop those specific underwater current navigation techniques? I've been commanding submarines for 12 years and never seen anything like them. Advanced submarine rescue training, Lex replied. It's offered to all submarine commanders who want to pursue it, regardless of gender. The question isn't who can learn these techniques, it's who's willing to do the additional work to master them. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Every submarine commander there could have pursued the same advanced training Lex had completed, but most had assumed their basic submarine qualifications were sufficient. Admiral Brooks cleared his throat. Commander Morgan, I'm recommending you for immediate promotion to captain with assignment to develop new Arctic submarine training protocols for the entire submarine fleet. But Lex's response shocked everyone in the room. Admiral Brooks, I appreciate the recommendation, but I have a different proposal, Lex said, her voice carrying the quiet authority of someone who had just saved lives under impossible conditions. Instead of promotion, I'd like to serve as Arctic Submarine Training Coordinator for all commanders who want to develop advanced underwater rescue capabilities. Harrison looked confused. You're turning down a captain's promotion. I'm accepting a mission, Lex replied. Yesterday proved that our current submarine training doesn't prepare commanders for real Arctic emergency conditions. If we're going to deploy submarines in polar waters, every commander needs access to advanced rescue training, not just the ones who happen to pursue it independently. Admiral Brooks nodded slowly, understanding. You want to make sure no submarine commander ever has to watch their crew die because they weren't properly trained for Arctic emergencies. Exactly. And I want to make sure every submarine in Arctic waters has a commander who can bring their entire crew home safely, no matter what conditions they face. The respect in the room was palpable. Even Harrison, who had spent 2 days dismissing Lex's submarine capabilities, seemed to understand the magnitude of what she was offering. Commander, Harrison said quietly, I owe you more than an apology. I'd like to be the first submarine commander to sign up for your advanced Arctic rescue training program. Over the following months, word spread through Navy submarine commands about what had happened at the Arctic Operations Center. Commander Lex Morgan's Advanced Arctic Submarine Training Initiative became the most requested specialized program in the submarine fleet. But the real test of her new training program came 8 months later when the USS Colorado faced a real Arctic crisis off the north slope of Alaska. Ice damage had trapped the submarine at critical depth, and traditional rescue operations were impossible due to severe weather conditions above the ice. The Colorado's commander, Captain Michelle Fowler, had completed Lex's advanced Arctic submarine training program just 3 months earlier. Using the techniques Lex had developed, Fowler successfully evacuated her entire crew of 132 through ice conditions that would have been impossible to navigate with standard submarine protocols. When Admiral Brooks received the after-action report from the Colorado incident, he called Lex personally from his new position as Deputy Commander, Submarine Force Pacific. "Captain Morgan," he said, his voice filled with genuine admiration, "your training program just saved 132 submarine crew members. The Colorado is safe because of the protocols you developed." "It's what we developed together, Admiral," Lex replied. "That's how real progress happens in submarine operations, when we stop assuming limitations and start building capabilities." 10 months after the Alaska incident, Commander Alexandra Morgan was indeed promoted to captain, but not for the reasons anyone expected. Her promotion came with assignment as Submarine Force Advanced Training Commander, responsible for developing specialized emergency response programs across all submarine operations. Her first official act was to establish the Arctic Submarine Readiness Protocol, making advanced polar rescue training mandatory for all submarine commanders operating in northern waters. The program's motto, suggested by Admiral Brooks himself, read, "Assumptions sink ships. Training saves crews." But perhaps the most significant change came in Admiral Brooks himself. He requested assignment as Lex's deputy commander, wanting to learn directly from the submarine officer he had once dismissed. "Captain Morgan," he said during their first official meeting in her new role, "I've been commanding submarines for 32 years, and I thought I knew what submarine leadership looked like. You taught me I was completely wrong." "How so, Admiral?" Lex asked. "I thought submarine command was about proving individual superiority," Brooks replied. "You showed me it's about creating capability throughout the entire submarine force." Today, the Advanced Arctic Submarine Training Initiative has expanded beyond individual commands. NATO submarine forces, allied navies, and even civilian submarine rescue organizations send personnel to train under protocols developed by Captain Alexandra Morgan. But for those submarine commanders who were there that day in Alaska, they remember something else about Lex Morgan, not just her technical submarine skills or her courage under extreme conditions, but her refusal to let others' assumptions define what submarine commanders could accomplish. Commander Harrison, now one of her most vocal advocates throughout the submarine force, puts it simply, "She didn't just save lives that day. She saved all of us from our own limitations as submarine leaders." The story of that day at the Arctic Operations Center became legend in submarine circles, but Captain Morgan herself rarely discusses it. When pressed by younger submarine officers about her approach to discrimination and prejudice in submarine service, her answer is always the same. "Don't waste energy proving others wrong about submarine command. Use that energy proving yourself capable of bringing every crew member home safely." Results speak louder than arguments in submarine operations. But there's one detail about that day that even Admiral Brooks doesn't know. A detail that remains in Lex's classified submarine personnel file, known only to submarine force leadership at the Pentagon. The malfunction in the Arctic training facility wasn't entirely accidental. It was a controlled test designed by Naval Submarine Intelligence to evaluate how submarine commanders respond when systems fail catastrophically and crew lives are at immediate risk. The exercise was meant to identify submarine officers capable of independent decision-making under impossible underwater conditions. Admiral Brooks had been unknowingly participating in the evaluation himself. His treatment of Lex, his response to the crisis, and his willingness to acknowledge error were all being assessed by submarine force observers he never knew were monitoring the exercise. The final evaluation report, filed directly with the commander, submarine forces, contained a single recommendation. Commander Alexandra Morgan should be fast-tracked for promotion to admiral, with assignment to develop Navy-wide submarine emergency response protocols for extreme conditions. But Lex Morgan chose a different path. One focused on developing other submarine commanders rather than advancing her own career, proving once again that real submarine leadership isn't about the rank you achieve, but about the capabilities you create throughout the submarine force. The ice may have been artificial that day in Alaska, but the courage, skill, and submarine command excellence displayed by Commander Lex Morgan were as real and solid as a submarine's hull. And in a Navy where assumptions about gender, capability, and submarine leadership are still being challenged, her example continues to break through barriers as effectively as she broke through that Arctic training pool's deadly current. Sometimes the most important battles submarine commanders fight aren't against enemy vessels or dangerous waters. Sometimes they're fought against the prejudices and assumptions that prevent the submarine force from recognizing the exceptional leaders among them. Commander Alexandra Lex Morgan proved that day in Alaska that true submarine command strength isn't about meeting others' expectations. It's about exceeding your own capabilities and ensuring every submarine crew member under your responsibility comes home safely. In the unforgiving world of submarine operations, that's the only standard that truly matters.